Welcome to Cross Party Lines with Chris Finlayson, Phil Goff, and myself, Sam Collins. It's a podcast designed to unpack New Zealand politics so that you don't have to. As 2025 draws to a close, almost said 2026 there, but it's definitely the end of 2025. We wanted to look back on what seems like a fairly frenetic year in the political space and review some of the moments that stand out in the back of our minds. So today we're going to loosely look at about three sections and see where the conversation takes us. It is probably the least planned episode we've ever had, so bear with us as we, as the wheels start turning. But the three areas are the biggest surprise of 2025. The second area is the best and worst performers of 2025, and the third area is the best and worst policies of 2025. So strap in, and away we go. Actually, before we get started, Chris, last week you couldn't join us for the Q&A episode, which is a great shame, but there was one question that specifically came in for you. So would you mind if I ask that now?
Yeah, fire away.
So the question came in, and I actually can't remember who it's from now, but I'll tag you. I'll tag you when we post the video. It was, what advice would you have for a Liberal member of the National Party? How is it best to influence the party to push more towards a better future for the National Party rather than the current sort of conservative direction? Did you have any advice for that person?
Oh, I think that's an excellent question because the National Party is a Liberal Conservative party, but in recent years, it's fair to say it's lost its bearings. It is not a Conservative party. And Wyatt Creech, who represented a rural electorate of Wairarapa for many years, said exactly that to me, that even if you're representing a rural electorate, it doesn't mean to say you're a Conservative. So you've just got to fight back and stand up in caucus and in party gatherings and state your view firmly. And if it gets the noses of those in power out of joint, well, that's just bad luck. And I've seen it time and time again. I've also seen it where people have acquiesced. And I remember in 1980, I think I was the esteemed deputy chair of the Karori branch of the National Party, and I said to Hugh Templeton, after Muldoon was in trouble after the East Coast Bays by-election, Hugh, knife him, go with Brian Tallboys and you could be foreign minister. And I remember Hugh saying to me, oh no, you don't change your horse in midstream, Chris. But I just think the history of the National Party could have been so much better had they got rid of that ghastly fellow in 1980 and put someone vaguely civilized like Brian Tallboys in. So you've just got to speak up, and Phil will say the same about the Labour Party. The Labour Party's a broad social democratic party, and you've just got to stand by your principles. And as I say, if it upsets people, well, that's bad luck.
And I think probably important for people that are listening to note, if they're not involved in the political party, just how much actually gets done at the grassroots.
Oh, that's a good point, but you've got to get involved, so I'd say if you're broadly left-wing, get involved in the Labour Party. If you're broadly right-wing, get involved in the National Party. And there's no point being an armchair critic and sneering at the political process, because if you don't get involved, then, I mean, a good example is the Tory party. The membership has reduced over the years, so it's full of what David Cameron refers to as the swivel-eyed loons from Northamptonshire. And the result kind of speaks for itself, 120 seats, and they are earmarked for extinction. Well, Phil would know more about that, having been over there relatively recently. And I'll touch on a couple of those themes in the course of this program, but there's no point sneering at the Labour Party and the National Party. If you're not happy, get involved. Put your name forward for branch chair or electorate chair or your local LEC. Get involved, stand up and push for policy. But as I say, I have utter contempt for those who look down on the political process and prefer just to snipe from the sidelines. Those people are of no use at all.
Well, we've just done our bit for the political party recruiting as we go into an election year, which I'm sure there'll be plenty of LEC and local electorate chairs very, very happy about. But let's move on to the topics of the day. Phil, we'll go to you first. What was your biggest surprise in the political scene of 2025?
I think the biggest surprise was the expected recovery that never occurred. At the start of this year, I thought, look, we're coming way out of COVID now. The world economy is improving. The barriers are down. We'll start to see some big improvements. It didn't happen, and because it didn't happen, you can see where it didn't happen. I mean, most people go. We talk about the inflation levels. Most people talk about the cost of living. Every time somebody goes to a supermarket, they thought that prices were going up faster than last year, and the statistics show they were. 3% up from 2% the previous year, and your dollar's not going as far. But also, survive until 25 was the business mantra. But I was just looking at the company liquidation figures for this year, and they're well over 2,000, about the highest in 15 years. And also the New Zealand Stock Exchange top 50 have underperformed compared to other countries. So, we're all expecting and wanting the recovery, and it didn't occur. And you can see that, the surplus is being pushed out by another year. So the surprise of the economy not recovering also leads to the related surprise, which is the Labor Party has recovered from its devastating electoral defeat in 2023 much faster than you might have imagined. They were down to 27% in the election, the last election. That was only 2 years ago. And, the latest Talbot Mills poll is probably the best for them. It's at 38%, but even the other polls are showing that they're in the low to mid 30%. And conversely, National has come down. So will we see the surprise of a one-term National-led coalition? Well, that remains to be seen. I think it's still too close to call. But the surprise was that, Chris Hipkins was able to reinvent himself so quickly. He was Prime Minister. He lost the election. He lost it badly. But he's come back. He's outperforming Luxon in the polls, in most of the polls, and Labor's ahead in most of the polls. So that would not have been what I would have predicted at the start of the year, but it's how the year has ended up.
Mm, mm. Chris, are you seeing the same sort of sentiment in your circles around the cost of living and sort of how the economy is going? Obviously, just before we all broke for the Christmas period, we did hear that the GDP was up 1.1%, so that's a positive. But are you still, as you go about your life, hearing people sort of mutter and sort of get a bit angry about where we are with the economy?
Oh, yeah, well, I'm a quintessential Wellingtonian, so the mood here is pretty bleak. Although, interestingly enough, it has a lower unemployment level than in Auckland. So, but there's just Wellington's in a funk, and it needs to basically snap out of it. But no, I'm much more interested in telling you about what my surprise of the year was, because at the beginning of the year, I would have predicted that Albo would be a one-term Prime Minister, but I hadn't figured on how absolutely useless that prize goof Dutton would be in destroying the Liberal Party in Australia. And I've moaned before about all those beautiful Liberal urban electorates that used to go with big margins for people like Menzies and Turnbull. And once they got... Well, I used to have meetings with him when I was in charge of the security agencies, and I used to nickname him Neanderthal Man because Dutton really was, some of his views were just hopeless, and the thought that the party of Menzies could select someone like him as leader is frankly unimaginable. I was always a great fan of Malcolm Turnbull. Malcolm Turnbull was the lawyer who gave the British government hell in the Spycatcher case, and then went off and made lots of money. It was a lying call, I think, whether he went into the Labour Party or the Liberal Party, but he was just your quintessential Liberal Conservative Prime Minister. And he said recently, as I said on this program, look, let's take a scientific approach to climate change. If there's a problem, let's deal with it. all pretty sensible, really. But Dutton, or Neanderthal man, adopted policies that most of urban Australia found repugnant, and the Liberals were handed probably one of the biggest canings that I've ever seen in electoral politics. And Dutton had lost the seat of Dixon, which he held for 24 years, before I had even finished my entree in a Sydney restaurant. So what's the moral of the story? And it comes back to the question that I was asked earlier. If Conservative parties become exclusively right-wing, they stuff themselves. Look at the Canadians losing an unlosable election earlier this year. Look at the decimation of the Liberals. Look at the pathetic state of the Conservative Party in Britain, where, frankly, a creature like Farage is many points ahead of them. If you abandon your Liberal Conservative or your Whig and Conservative principles, then you will destroy your party. And so Albo enters, Phil, doesn't he? He enters the Labour pantheon as one of the great prime ministers. Hell of a nice guy. Jerry Brownlee loved him when they were both transport minister of the respective countries. Really good guy, classy operator, but I genuinely thought he'd be a one-term prime minister. But looking at the result, the size of the result surprised me. But given the way in which Dutton managed to stuff up everything, I suppose I shouldn't be all that surprised.
Yeah, I think it could have gone either way earlier in the year in the Australian election. Albo's a good guy, decent guy. I've met him a number of times. He's an adult in the way that he runs the country. He makes sensible decisions. He's anything but charismatic. I just watched him after the Bondi massacre, and I thought Chris McManus at the New South Wales Premier really, he was spot on and got the cheers, and poor old Albo got a hard time. But Dutton, I had occasion to meet Dutton. I went over as a parliamentarian, actually, not as a minister, to talk to him about the deportation of New Zealanders. And he didn't use the phrase to me, but he used it subsequently, that returning New Zealanders who'd committed offences in Australia was putting out the trash, which I really didn't appreciate. And he called them New Zealanders, but a lot of them were people that had gone to Australia as babies or toddlers or primary school kids. And the fact that they fell down on the wrong side of the law, became criminals, had more to do with their socialisation in Australia than it had anything to do with New Zealand. But he was prepared to put it back on us and say, no, you take these people that will come to New Zealand, not speaking with a Kiwi accent, but an Australian one, not knowing anything about New Zealand, not having any family in New Zealand, but you take responsibility for it. So I was pretty unimpressed with Dutton then, but I agree with Chris's summation. And Trump has helped some people around the world by backing them, particularly in Latin America and Argentina and more recently in Honduras. But he certainly didn't help the Conservative Party in Canada or the Liberals in Australia. And the more that Dutton tried to look like Trump, and people were already, Aussies are a bit like New Zealanders in their regard to about Trump, they thought, we don't need this. We need a sensible person in charge of the country. And Albo got back with an unprecedented majority. So, yeah, he did well. And, the Australian track record, and the Labor Party's track record in Australia isn't that great electorally. So to get re-elected on an increased majority the second time around was a feather in his cap.
And a good example of where the Liberal Party could have gone is after the Bondi massacre, you may recall the former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg spoke.
Oh, God, he was awful.
Well, I met him at Auschwitz at the 70th anniversary of the liberation. A hell of a nice guy. And but the Liberal Party's lost. It got Tim Wilson back in Goldstein, but they've just lost this huge swathe of intelligent, urbane, competent performers, and the people that they have replaced are sort of vaguely more sensible than Barnaby Joyce, who's left the National Party to go off with Pauline Hanson. But these people are horrible people, and they are death electorally.
The comment I'd make about Freudenberg was that I thought his speech after the Bondi Beach killings was pretty awful. What happened in New Zealand is that people came together. And what I saw in Australia, and particularly from Freudenberg in that speech, was a chance to make political capital out of it. And I just thought that was really bad. On a solemn occasion where people get murdered, innocent people going about their daily business get murdered, you try to come together as a country. You don't try to capitalise on it.
Oh, I think Minns was also speaking out about the need for a royal commission. So I do think, in fairness, the Jewish community was traumatized. But I mean, the other point that you made about Dutton and that disgusting phrase about putting out the trash. Well, of course, the biggest piece of trash arising out of Christchurch resides in Paramaribo, and he won't be going back anytime soon. But I agree with you. The use of that phrase was just simply beyond the bounds of political decency. And I remember sitting at a dinner of spies, heads of spy agencies, and I was having a go at the person next to me from ASIO about that phrase, and she stopped speaking to me for the rest of the dinner. So that's the way it was.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh. And of course, the biggest surprise of the election night in Australia was also that Peter Dutton lost his own seat, which was, as the leader of a party, a particularly depressing thing for him to wake up to. Now, we'll move on from potentially a couple of dark topics there, and we'll go to some lighter topics. I'd like for you guys both to tell me who your best political performer of 2025 was. Should we start with you, Chris?
Well, I prefer to look at it in terms of political parties. On the Green side, very impressed by Steve Abel. Hell of a nice guy. Contributions on a number of topics, excellent. On the Labour side, I grouped together what I call the rising stars of the Labour Party, the young, very bright, articulate women, Camilla Bellich, Asha Verrill, Rachel Brooking, Barbara Edmonds, Vanushi Walters, Arena Williams. Very nice.
Gosh.
Well,
Lots of lawyers as well.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I can't totally hold that against them.
No, but look at it. Very capable people, and they're going to get their chance to shine in the sun at some stage. Very, very impressive. On the national side, I think Chris Pink's had a very good year, and I think Chris Bishop has. And while I'm holding my breath on how the Indian FTA goes, I give a lot of credit to Macleay for the work that he's done. He's visited India 7 times. I thought it was pipe dream stuff, and we'll talk about it a little later in terms of substantive policy, but I think he's had a good year as well. So when you look at it in terms of blocks, you notice I haven't mentioned New Zealand First because I loathe them, and ACT because, the Undersecretary who was working with Chris Bishop seems to have done a pretty good job on RMA reform. I forget his name. Cameron, is it?
Simon Court.
Oh, Simon Court. And with the Maori Party, forget it.
And speaking of Chris Pink, actually, he now follows us on Substack. That was, I think, just the day after Christmas, I got the notification that Chris Pink follows us on Substack.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, I've said some nice things about you.
Phil, who's on your star list for 2025?
Yeah, well, it's a good year for Chris's, apparently. I agreed substantially with what our Chris said. Chris Pink, I thought, has done a good job on building. He's been active on it. I like him personally. He's a decent sort of a guy. Chris Bishop, I think, has been the outstanding policy performer on the National Party side. But, I might sound a bit like a Labour hack here, but I've got to say that moving from being a defeated Prime Minister in one of the worst election results we've had to being preferred Prime Minister and leading a party polling higher than the leading government party, you've got to give Chris Hipkins some credit for that. He's got the worst job in Parliament. I've just been reading Hansard from the 2000s, and poor old Jenny Shipley's just getting massacred as leader of the opposition. And I went through that. Helen Clark went through that. Bill English went through that. But he's bounced back. Now, you don't have to be charismatic to be a person that's going to win an election. And I think that he has enhanced the chances of his party winning the election because he looks like a safe pair of hands. He looks reasonable. He looks sensible. He looks considered and moderate. And I think he's got a new relationship, which probably makes his personal life happier. She's a very, very nice lady, Tony. And I just think that he's led, with people that Chris mentioned, the mid-level and some of the front-level people. And, again, mentioned Barbara Edmonds. You always have to have the sense of being able to financially manage the economy, and she has real credibility there. I think Carmel Sepuloni has performed well. She came from a pretty rough background. When I first met her, she was a solo mum living in a state house in my electorate. Now she's, deputy leader of the opposition and performs consistently well. Aisha Verrill, again, somebody that's got expertise in that area. So I'd give those people credit. The other one I'd mention in the national side, I think, is Erica Stanford. I don't know whether she's done the right things yet. It's too early to tell. And she has burned off some of the educationalists, but they see things through their particular spectrum. But she's been active and she's communicated well, as Chris Bishop has. So I think we've probably got a substantial level of agreement among the good performers there. I'm struggling when I think of the New Zealand First Party to say anybody there that I think is outstanding.
What about if we move on to the worst performers? If
Yeah,
we move straight on to the worst
now you're
performers, could you
talking,
pick any names?
Yeah,
Well,
I'd like to
you
endorse.
go first, Chris.
I'd
Yeah.
like to endorse what Phil said about Chris Hipkins. He's a nice guy. I've never seen him behave in a manner since the election other than with dignity. I always, on a personal level, very much like Bill Rowland, and he had a dreadful time in opposition, and I wondered whether Chris Hipkins was going to be similar to him, but I don't think he is. So, Bill lived down the road from me in Kandala, as indeed did that well-known son of Wainuia Mata, Trevor Mallard. Bill used to swim in the Kashmir school pool along with his kids, and I held the esteemed position of caretaker of the Kashmir school when I was at varsity. And hell of a nice guy, but up against a brute like Muldoon, found it very hard. So I wondered if Hipkins would suffer a similar sort of fate, but I don't think it's happening. So in terms of keeping his party together and keeping them in play for the election, it's been a pretty impressive effort, in my opinion. Now we move on to the worst performers. Well, there are quite a few candidates for that. I think the single, all right, before we do worst, most tasteless performance, well, of course, the gold medal for that would have to go to Stuart Nash. The only thing he's really got in common with the Labour Party is the surname of his grandfather or great-grandfather. I mean, and what he said in that infamous interview with Sean Plunkett was just disgusting. And I just cannot believe that in this day and age, you would have people who would talk like that. That kind of discourse is really out of the park. And whether he was trying to impress the barbarians who form the New Zealand First voting bloc, I don't know. But so he wins the gold medal. But I really do think in terms of the worst performers, and it goes with my deep revulsion of their politics, is New Zealand First. They were in favour of Paris, now they're campaigning against it. Even more unbelievably, they voted for the regulatory standards legislation, and the next week said they were going to oppose it. They are just shameless opportunists. And I go to bed every night and I pray to the good Lord that they are not part of any government which is formed after 2026. We don't need that kind of politics in New Zealand. With Winston, he's been around. It's in 2026, it will be 51 years since he first stood for Northern Maori against old Matt Rata. And I just think it's time. We've had enough. Time to move on. This kind of, I'll vote for it and then oppose it. He opposed your China FTA as well.
He did, actually. Yes, that's right.
And he's opposing the Indian FTA.
And for anybody to say that the China FTA hasn't delivered hugely, that's $40 billion worth of two-way trade in New Zealand's favour. We export more to them than we import from China. So, he might have had the good grace to admit that he was wrong about China, but no, he now wants to tack on, which I guess is an implied anti-immigration, anti-Indian stance that he's taken. And, I think Chris and I agree that, that sort of shameless populism just leaves me cold. I mean, Casey Costello got up and spoke in favour of the Regulatory Standards Bill, and the next week, Winston Peters, her leader, who must have instructed her to speak in favour of it, said that he was going to vote against it. Now, if somebody says one thing this week and the opposite next week, without good reason for any change in mind, you've got to say, can we trust that person's word to do what they're going to say? Or are they just out for a bit of cheap?
Shameless populism is a very good way, Phil, to describe it. We don't need it in this country. We're too good to have that kind of crap.
Casey Costello comes into my worst performers because she ignored the health department advice that heated tobacco products were just as damaging to your health as ordinary tobacco products, and she halved the tax on it, costing the New Zealand taxpayer, $300 million that we've got to find that was gifted to Philip Morris. So that was pretty awful. Penny Simmons, I've got to say, I probably have to explain to most people who Penny Simmons is. She was Minister of Environment. She was sacked from that. She's Minister in charge of tertiary education. She was head of the Southland Polytech. She wiped out the reforms, which were not doing as well as they should have done on tertiary training and education, but went back to the old system that everybody admitted at the time was failing. So we've had 2 years, coming up 3 years, where we've only gone backwards, and we've gone backwards to a system that people knew wasn't working, whereas she could have taken the reforms and said, okay, I've got some expert advice on this. This is where they've gone wrong, and this is how I'm going to fix it. But she didn't. In terms of the losers as against the worst performers, and I differentiate the two because I think, it'd be wrong to say that Luxon or Willis were bad performers. I think they're both quite smart people, but they're losers because the economy hasn't succeeded. And in Christopher Luxon's position, he hasn't communicated well. He isn't a John Key. He hasn't sold the policy. He hasn't led from the front, and he's enabled himself to look like he's been pushed around by Seymour and Peters. And that has made him a loser and a loser in the polls as well. And Willis, I just think from the fact that she's so closely tied to the economy, and because the economy is failing, she's being attacked from left and right because they're both saying the same thing. This is what you promised and you haven't delivered. Almost all of the indicators are in the wrong direction, except for growth in the last quarter. But if you take growth over the year, we're still a loser there. I think, going into the ranks of some of the other parties probably wouldn't be very productive. But yeah, it's easy. I'm kind of reluctant to criticize people, and I'm sure they're all trying to do their best, but their best in a number of cases simply isn't good enough.
Oh, that's a good segue into my overall loser of the year. And it's not in the world of politics, but it's Air New Zealand. I turned up to the airport the other day and they cancelled my flight to Rotorua. I'm forever texting Todd McClay saying, this airline is failing your city. Do you know what the excuse was? They didn't have any crew. So you telling me that you can't get a schedule together so that you've got a couple of people who can fly a damn plane to Rotorua. And I blame Luxon for this, they got rid of the Beach 1900s, so there's no connectivity with the regions now, and they cancel flights, say, to Blenheim or Rotorua if the numbers are down, and there is no flight to Taupo from Wellington anymore. They sold the slot at Heathrow. Now they want to go back there, and they can't get in, so they have to go to Gatwick. They bought a whole lot of planes with the engines that don't work. And so, and their safety video sucks. And they're talking about, they are obsessed with all this third-rate marketing nonsense about we're going to have a new lounge called Koru Black. I don't give a damn about sitting in a lounge. I just want to get on a plane and fly from Auckland to Wellington at 5 o'clock. And my beef with you, Phil, and your government is that in 2001, they could have been flogged off to Singapore Airlines, and you didn't do it. And I would have thought that any airline that was taken over by Singapore would do very, very well. And I want you to explain to our listeners why you oppose that then, because we have a complete lemon as a national airline. It is failing the people of New Zealand. And the real anger I get is not about the political class, I have to tell you. It's about people who are really sick of third-rate performance from Air New Zealand. So explain yourself, please.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I'm not going to justify the way Air New Zealand has performed and some of the decisions made more recently. I think the decision to cease the direct flight to London was just a disaster, and they've recognised that now by the new leadership saying we'd love to have it back, but they'll get it back in Gatwick, which is not as good as Heathrow. Heathrow's closer; it's on the tube line, etc. But why we didn't sell Air New Zealand was because Air New Zealand is a major promoter of New Zealand around the world. And look, I think Singapore Airlines is a very good airline, but I wouldn't have the confidence that Singapore Airlines would always act in the interests of New Zealand as against in their own commercial interests and promoting Singapore Airlines. While I don't make excuses for poor decision making by Air New Zealand, I tell you what, if Singapore Airlines came in, they'd close half the regional routes in New Zealand because they're not profitable. So, well, I don't know whether it's worth closing them or having them where you say we've got problems with staffing when you really mean we've only got 15 passengers on this flight, so we're going to lose money on it. So, why don't they just say that? That'd be a lot more honest, wouldn't it? But no, I'm all in favour of having a national airline. Tourism's our second biggest export product, and our national airline should be a major promoter of New Zealand internationally. But it's got to be run well, and it's made some fundamental mistakes, and it's underperforming at the present time.
And we thank you for your patience when I have none.
I got that idea from your comments over recent programs.
Yeah. I think if anyone word searched all our podcasts, Air New Zealand might be one of the most common words we use, actually. Let's move into a policy debate, or maybe not a debate. Maybe we might agree on this one as well. But Phil, we'll start with you. What was your? We'll end on best, but what was your worst policy of 2025 that you saw?
The worst policy of 2025, I was just focusing on what the best policy was. I go back to the one about halving the tax on heated tobacco products. I think that's a disaster. A far more influential problem with poor policy making was in climate change, where we've retreated on just about every front on doing something about climate change, either reducing our emissions or adapting to climate change. And Trump's provided convenient cover for that. The policies that really got up my nose were the ones promoted by the coalition partners. The dog whistling on immigration, which I've talked about on air. I think when you start playing with appealing to racial prejudices to say, this is why we've got a problem in New Zealand. Too many Indians here, which it kind of sounded like what Peters was saying, and too many Chinese. I mean, he's done it before quite patently, talking about the Asian invasion. You go back and read his speeches in the 1990s, they were appalling. But the same speeches are being given today. They just warmed up again and again because he knows that, maybe there's 10% of the population out there that are anti-migrant if the migrants aren't white Anglo-Saxons. And so I really resent that because that's playing with fire and can really damage our society. The other dog whistling was really with David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill. Now, look, there are plenty of valid debates to have about what the treaty means and how it should be applied and how we can get equity to all concerned. But you don't go out with policies designed just to polarize for the benefit of your group and ironically to the benefit of the Maori Party that did really well because they were as angry about the ACT Party as the anti-Maori people were in favour of what the ACT Party was doing. We don't need either of those groups, frankly. We need to have a sensible policy that says how can we as a country of many peoples live together as one nation and do so fairly and harmoniously, because that's fundamental to the quality of our life and the quality of our society. So I think those are some of the worst policies. If we have time at the end, and I'll leave it to the end, otherwise I'll take too much time, I'd say just about every bloody thing that Trump has done was the worst policy that you could imagine for humanity. Whether it's cutting aid, which literally will result in millions of people dying each year because the wealthiest country in the world won't provide the health and famine relief that they need for survival, whether it's about cutting Medicaid in the United States from poor people needing medical attention that now won't get it, while he cuts corporate taxes and makes Elon Musk even wealthier than he is as a budding trillionaire, whether it's weaponizing the Justice Department to bring actions against his political opponents, or it's his tariff policies, which he's reversed time and again and still is confused, but has done enormous damage to international rule of law in both trade and politics. I'll leave it at that.
And I think the scariest part about that Trump piece is it feels like it has been a lot longer than a year, but it's not even been a year yet. As we head into New Year's Eve, it's not even been a year. So what's another 3 gonna do to the psyche of the world? Chris, on that happy note, what's your worst policy of the year?
Well, people say, oh, he's a Maori lover. But in my time in politics and thereafter, I have come to love the Indigenous people of my land and think that the contribution they make is so fantastic. Look at the Maori economy and so on. And so in that light, I have to say that the change of the law in relation to the foreshore and seabed was appalling. Now, the government introduced this legislation at the behest of sort of the Hobson's choice types, and have completely stuffed it. And and what is more, it must be the first time ever that a government has moved to change the law when they've won in the Supreme Court. So it defies all belief. They said they were introducing the law to clarify the parliamentary intention as at 2011. That is untruthful. That is not the truth. They've misrepresented the position about what happened in 2010, and they are not telling the truth about the change in the law and the reason for it. Let me give you one example to illustrate how utterly bereft of principle this grubby little law change was. They have reversed the onus of proof so that Maori applicants now have to prove non-extinguishment, whereas under my legislation, the burden of proving extinguishment lay on the party or the Crown who was seeking to take advantage of that. And Goldsmith was asked a question about this on Morning Report, about the reversal of the onus of proof, and his response, which was frankly worthy of Mr. Bean was, oh, well, you have to understand that the foreshore is part of the birthright of New Zealanders. So he couldn't answer the question about why the burden of proof or the onus had changed. And that was the level of debate in the House. It was shameful. It was very unfair. There was no problem. And they've, I think, done Maori a grave disservice. Tangata whenua bought into the new system. And I have to tell you, Phil, after the 2008 election, who gave me the best advice on the way forward? Well, it wasn't the specialist group that it was set up. It was Michael Cullen, who wrote to me a very nice letter and said, "This is, what about this?" And it was great advice. It was in the finest bipartisan traditions of politics. And we got to a good place. And what they did last year was mean-spirited, based on a lie, totally unfair to tangata whenua who bought into the existing system. And do you know why they were winning cases in the court? Because the opposition was so weak. And not for me to comment on Crown law, I suppose, but the case mounted by the Crown in so many cases against the applicants was pretty feeble. And that's why they were winning. And so I think it's a shameful episode in New Zealand history, and I hope at some stage that this disgraceful amendment will be repealed.
Well, sometimes I stand in awe of the sermons you can give on such intricate detail, Chris. But I suppose that is your profession. Let's move on to the best policy. Phil, what's your best policy of 2025?
Well, I'll start with the government, and I would say that there's a lot about the RMA reform that could be very helpful in terms of removing costs and contributing to growth. I hope they've got the balance right so that there's sufficient there to get protection for the environment where it's required and protection of people's rights to be involved without unnecessarily undue delay in processing consents. But the one complaint I'd have about that mainly is that it was to a significant degree the same as what David Parker had done, and you could have had that legislation changed because the new government is entitled to make changes to it and done and dusted in the first year rather than waiting more than 2 years to see it in place. The second, I'll go back to the FTA that Chris was talking about before. Look, India is the fastest growing economy in the world. It It's been very protectionist in the past. It's been very hard to get a deal from. This deal isn't a gold standard deal. It excludes most of dairy products, which is our biggest export. But that's not surprising because they've given dairy to nobody. But it has for about 50% of our exports brought in tariff-free overnight, and a lot of the fruit areas coming in there, forestry, and others where it's being phased out, seafood. There are some things that are worthwhile there. We have made some ambitious claims that we will ensure that the private sector invests $20 billion in the Indian economy in the next 15 years. I'm not quite sure how the government is going to ensure that happens. There is some clawback clauses if we don't do that, so it's not cost-free. And look, while it's not perfect, we need to have a foot in the door with this economy. So, I'm in favour of anything that can assist our exporters to have guarantees in a world where Trump has made things very uncertain and where we absolutely need to diversify. Our trade with India is about a tenth of the two-way trade with China. But when I started with the FTA and got the FTA through on China, it was probably about twice as much as what the Indian trade is now, but it wasn't 5 times as much. So we saw the real benefits from the China FTA, and hopefully over time we'll see some benefits from the Indian one. But I think, unsurprisingly, my best policy was the Labor Party having the courage to say, we're going to introduce a capital gains tax. It's going to be moderate, it's going to be straightforward, it's going to be simple, but it's going to bring equity so that people who earn their money through the sweat of their brow or the workings of their mind and pay income tax are on the same footing as people that make a profit out of buying and selling property as a living. And it's also going to be good, I think, because it will good for the economically. That's why most economists are in favour of it, because it'll take some of the shine off thinking that the easiest and best performing investment is in the property market when we want people to invest in the productive market. So congratulations to Chris Hipkins and particularly Barbara Edmonds on that. I think she's given credibility to it. She's a person that's advised ministers working in ministerial offices over different governments. She's an expert on tax matters. The Cullen Task Force on Tax provided all the evidential base to do this. So, you didn't have an opposition scurrying around trying to find the resource material. It was all there. But it was done in a way that was clear and straightforward. And look, it will affect, probably 1 in 10 people to some degree. It won't be retrospective, so you won't be paying huge amounts of capital gain on property that you've owned for 30 years. But it will lead New Zealand in the right direction in terms of having a balanced tax system. And the bonus will be that the revenue from that will be ring-fenced towards spending on health, where the needs are far greater than there is resources available to meet them. I mean, the only other thing they could have done was to have reduced the deficit with that, which economically might have been better, but politically I understand absolutely why they'd say the bonus to 90% of New Zealanders is that we have help to make sure that everybody can get access to GPs without finance being a barrier. So that's my top policy.
And why explain to 9 out of 10 New Zealanders what the deficit is when you can say that this policy won't affect 9 out of 10 New Zealanders, I suppose? Anyway,
Yeah.
Chris, what's your best policy of the year?
You sound like Muldoon, because he used to say that sort of thing about the deficit.
Average New Zealander wouldn't know it if they fell over it.
That's right, they wouldn't. That's right. I have to say I'm genuinely excited by the Indian FTA. I mean, the China FTA was your crowning achievement, Phil, and it started off a couple of billion a year, and now what did you say the figure is? 40 billion. So if we can get something like that up with India, that's fabulous. I hope, let me nail my colours to the mast. I think this country could do with 1 million Indian residents, because they're fantastic people and they contribute at a level in New Zealand which is so profoundly good. My mum is in Bupa in Crofton Downs. Most of the staff and the management are Indian, fabulous people. When you talk to Uber drivers, so many of them, I say to them, why are you an Uber driver? Oh, I can't get the qualifications recognised in New Zealand. And I said, well, someone with your experience should be earning a couple of 100,000 a year doing X, Y, and Z. And so if the FTA can sort of do something about that, then I think that's going to be fabulous, because we are natural best friends with India. We've got so many historical links, and they're fabulous people. And this anti-Asian rhetoric that I hear makes me sick, whether it's the Chinese or the Filipinos or the Indians or Sri Lankans. We need many, many more of those people that will make our country that much more successful. So I'm hoping that it's the forerunner of a very good relationship that we will be able to build over the next couple of years. It's going to, whether it gets through, it's going to be dependent on Damien, I think.
Oh, Labor will support it, almost certainly.
I think there was inadequate consultation with the opposition about these things. Damien was a very good trade negotiations and agriculture minister. I think he could have been brought into the equation a lot earlier. And because of the antediluvian views of New Zealand First, who seem to have a problem with, they had a problem with Phil's FTA with China, totally wrong, just 100% wrong. And they're adopting a similar position with India. National Labour are going to have to sit down and have a chat about that. But just shows the importance that when you're dealing with these sorts of issues, the big beasts have to agree, and bipartisanship is the name of the game, because you can't rely on the smaller political parties. So I think potentially that is I think it's the singular achievement of this government in the last couple of years, and none of it is because of New Zealand First.
When I was Trade Minister, I used to take Tim Grocer on trade missions with me as the opposition spokesperson. So he'd come to, things like, I remember going to the WTO in Hong Kong with him. And it makes sense to have a bipartisanship when you're both wanting to do the best for your country and make things better for our exporters and grow our economy. So I never had any problem with that at all. And what's more, I didn't just take businessmen on trade missions, I took trade unionists on. Actually, I remember you were mentioning Steve Abel before. I think Steve Abel was one of the people, from an environmental point of view, that we had as one of the people involved with our policy discussions about trade. And that made sense. I mean, there are some things that you do because you're all New Zealanders, and what's good for the country, everybody needs to get in behind and support. And there's just no rationality in what Peter's said about China and the free trade agreement. None of it came true. It was all on the upside for New Zealand, and the same will be true of the Indian FTA. I mean, he said, "Oh, it's going to allow 5,000 Indian migrants in." By the time the families are, and his problem will be at the next election. At the moment, we've got a net migration inflow of 12,000. It's the lowest in recent history, and there'll come a time when the economy recovers, when we haven't been training our young New Zealanders in trade skills and tertiary skills, where we'll go back to relying on migration. And just as New Zealanders contribute as a net to Australia, even though the Australians always whinged about having to pay any social welfare benefit to a New Zealander, the migrants that come here are trained already, they're educated already, they'll work longer hours as New Zealanders do in Australia, they'll be very productive, and they'll be a net contributor to the society that they come to.
No,
So,
you are 100% right there. You accused me of sermonizing earlier, but I go to Mass at St Mary of the Angels in Wellington, absolutely full of people from Kerala.
yeah, Kerala's a great place
And
too.
they are the best people on earth. We need, is it only 5,000, is it?
Yeah, as part of the new agreement.
That's including family members.
We need many more than that. They are fantastic people, fantastic family members. And, if you're not going to be judgmental, far from it. But if you took the Indians, Sri Lankans, and Filipinos out of 9 o'clock Mass at St Mary's, there'd be about 5 Pākehā left. I mean, so
Yeah, that's right.
these people are the future of our country, and we need many, many more of them. I'm disappointed you said 5,000.
The last thing I'd say about migration is that you always have to have a balanced policy, because rather than the stop-go thing, floodgates open, floodgates closed, just to have a steady thing, a steady flow of migrants, the people we need for their skills and their hard work, and that we can keep up with in terms of providing social services. But as Chris has already referred to, I know when my dad was in in hospital care at the end of his life, the whole of the place would have closed down, but for the medical teams that were migrant nurses, doctors, the people, and also the people that did the caring roles, and a lot of them were Pacifica. So look, it's wrong to demonize migration. It's good to have a policy that's clear and brings in the number of people that New Zealand can readily absorb at any particular time. But when you start turning on people because of their race, I mean, it's a bit like Trump again. Let me go back to that topic. He just about stopped all refugees except one group. What was that one group? White Afrikaner South African farmers. Where's the humanity in that? I mean, no humanity in that. And there'll come a time, mark my words, I mean, he's closed the borders, and look, I didn't agree with huge levels of illegal migration coming into our country or anybody's country, but there'll come a time, and it won't be very far away, where they will have a massive labour shortage, and they'll reverse those policies, just like they've had to reverse many of their tariff policies. So it'll be no short-term gain, big long-term costs. and he'll hope that he's out of the position and won't be held accountable for the disaster that he's caused on all of those fronts.
But, in the election campaign, let's try and, I hope, have a sensible debate about the Indian FTA and about immigration in general. And, I would just say to the people who may be attracted to New Zealand First, those views are out of date and plain wrong. And Peters gave his farewell speech at the end of last year. Where you thank the guards and all that sort of thing at Parliament before you go off on holiday. And he was referring to the Labour Party and saying they think Manuel Labour is the president of Mexico, and everyone roared with laughter. The only thing is, he'd been saying that 30 and 40 years ago. It's so boring. It's so out of date. His jokes are recycled not once, not twice, but about 3 times, and he's just wrong. So if you really think that kind of negativism and nativism is what our little country needs, then think again. And that is sermonizing, and I make no apology for it.
And I'm and I'm still in awe. And actually, we're straying dangerously close to the what we wanted to do for the first episode of 2026, which will hopefully come out on the 13th of January, where I'll be putting some of the similar questions that we had today, but sort of in a predictive form to both Phil and Chris, as we talk about what we'd like to see the New Zealand political parties come out with, and the way they'd like to see policies debated in what will be a fairly frantic and frenetic election year. So make sure you join us for that. And just on behalf of me, thank you to you both, Phil and Chris, for agreeing to do this project. We've had some amazing feedback over the last couple of months. We're on a growth trajectory, which is good. My goal for this project was to make sure that we had an impact on the discourse involved in politics as we head into an election year, and hopefully to turn it more positive. And it certainly feels like we've found a group of people that are willing to go on that journey for us, with us on that. And if you're out there listening, make sure you follow the podcast wherever you follow podcasts, or on social media channels as well. I'm going to ask you guys one more question, which I hadn't told you about, but I just wondered whether you had any book recommendations for people for the summer holidays. Do you one and one only? I'm going to be very strict on this. Phil, what's your one book
Ooh.
recommendation?
Um, it's one about one of my ancestors. It's called Active Oblivion by Richard Harris. It's about a guy called Willie Goff, spelt in the Old English with an E on the end, who was one of the signatories to the death warrant of Charles I. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna mention this to Charles III, that we have something in common. And my office staff said, I wouldn't do it on the first meeting, High Commissioner. But I love Robert Harris. He's written some great things. Another good one was Fatherland, about as if Nazi Germany had won the war. It's historical. It's properly researched. It teaches you about history, but it's really interesting as well. So it's a historical novel, if you like. That's one of the best books I've read this year.
Chris, what do you got?
Well, you want one, you're going to get 2. One is Tony Abbott's History of Australia is actually very good. It's had some rave reviews, and I enjoyed that. And he was a bit of a weirdo in many ways in politics, but the book is very good. And on the other side of the ledger, there is a recent biography out of Goff Whitlam, which is very readable and very interesting, covering a fascinating period of politics. And we've had that debate in early November about his sacking and so on. So it's from the other side of the ditch, 2 very good books that are worth reading.
Thank you very much, guys. And what I'm reading at the moment is Dominion from Tom Holland, another podcaster, host of The Rest is Politics, and it is the history of Christianity through the Western lens. So incredibly interesting. Starts all the way back down in the Roman times and keeps going through. I'm only about halfway through at the moment, but we all know how it ends, don't we? So anyway, thank you so much for listening to Cross Party Lines, and we'll see you on the 13th of January.
And Happy New Year to all of our listeners. It might be an indoors one this year by the feel of the weather.
Oh, yes. Oh, Happy New Year.